The standard of truth has been erected. No unhallowed hand can stop the work from progressing. Persecutions may rage, mobs may combine, armies may assemble, calumny may defame, but the truth of God will go forth boldly, nobly, and independent, till it has penetrated every continent, visited every clime, swept every country, and sounded in every ear, till the purposes of God may be accomplished, and the great Jehovah shall say, the work is done. Joseph Smith declared that the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ would fill the entire earth. If you have ever wondered why the restoration happened when it did, how religious liberty made it possible, and what connection exists between the Constitution and the coming forth of the restored gospel, and why these things impact the entire world, then this is the episode for you. Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life, and we believe and are sure that thou art that Christ, the Son of the living God. This is Let Your Heart Be Glad. In part 1 of this mini-series, A Promised Land, the U.S. Constitution and the Restoration, we discussed Constitutional Literacy 101 with great help from President Dallin H. and two messages that he gave, one in 2010 and another in 2021. And today we are going to dive into another president's message about the Constitution titled Our Divine Constitution, given by President Ezra Taft Benson, as well as a talk given by Hiram W. Smith titled Why 1820. With their help, we are going to dive into how the United States Constitution and the restored gospel of Jesus Christ have a significant relationship, especially for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As you may recall, the Restoration introduced some beliefs that challenged the current religious traditions of that day. And thanks to the Bill of Rights, we were able to have the freedom of religion, which created space for those beliefs, however unpopular, to be preached. The freedom of speech allowed the message to be published, and the freedom of assembly allowed the believers to organize themselves. This is what President Oaks said about the Bill of Rights. Without a Bill of Rights, America could not have served as the host nation for the restoration of the gospel, which began just 3 decades later. There was divine inspiration in the original provision that there should be no religious test for public office, but the addition of the religious freedom and anti-establishment guarantees in the First Amendment was vital. We also see inspiration in the First Amendment's freedoms of speech and press, and in the personal protections in other amendments, such as for criminal prosecutions. So let's take a minute to discuss the First Amendment that made religious freedom possible. President Oaks taught, the Williamsburg Charter states, the First Amendment religious liberty provisions have both a logical and historical priority in the Bill of Rights. In sum, as much if not more than any other single provision in the entire Constitution, the religious liberty provisions hold the key to American distinctiveness and American destiny. This is not something that we can just brush off or think is unimportant or inconsequential. Religious freedom is the thing that makes us, as Americans, unique. As public respect for religion continues to decline in our day, safeguarding religious freedom becomes increasingly important. We cannot ignore the little things here and there that slowly attempt to strip away our freedom. President Oaks also said, religious belief and preaching must be protected against government action. Treating actions on religious belief the same as actions based on other systems of belief should not be enough to satisfy the special place of religion in the United States Constitution. Religious liberty isn't something we defend only when our beliefs are challenged. We defend it because conscience is sacred. That's what the Founding Fathers wanted and were inspired to make possible for the citizens of this country, is that we would be able to act upon our own conscience. In the Doctrine and Covenants section 134, verse 4, we read, we believe that religion is instituted of God, and that men are amenable to him, and to him only for the exercise of it. Unless their religious opinions prompt them to infringe upon the rights and liberties of others, we do not believe that human law has a right to interfere in prescribing rules of worship to bind the consciences of men, nor dictate forms of public or private devotion, that the civil magistrate should restrain crime, but never control conscience, should punish guilt, but never suppress the freedom of the soul. And in the 11th article of faith, we claim this. We claim the privilege of worshiping Almighty God according to the dictates of our own conscience, and allow all men the same privilege. Let them worship how, where, or what they may. That being said, we are going to dive into Hiram W. Smith's devotional, Why 1820. This devotional offers a fascinating perspective. In his message, he begins much earlier in world history, but we are going to jump in during the year 1620. And stay with me. We're going to read an entire page worth of his message, but it is fascinating and something worth considering. And I want to throw out there from the get-go that whether or not you agree with every historical conclusion that Hiram W. Smith draws, his central point is worth considering. So take a listen. What happened in 1620? The Puritans came to America. Fed up now with the lack of the freedoms that they wanted, they came to America. 1620, a nation is invented. It was discovered by Columbus. It was invented by the Puritans. The United States of America has its humble beginnings. Between 1620 and 1776, a nation is born. 1776, we'd had enough. We wrote a letter to King George. It said something like this. We're tired of your taxes. We don't like your troops over here. In fact, we don't like you. Will you take them home? We're going to be our own thing. Now, that paraphrases the Declaration of Independence a little bit, but that's basically what he said. An ugly war began. George was not very excited about that, and for the next 6 years, a war, the Revolution, and for some, miracle. May I suggest to you, having done a military study of the Revolution, there is no way that war could have been won without the direct intervention of God. I believe that with all my heart. 1781, the war ends. 1785 is the next date. A meeting begins in Philadelphia. They discover the Articles of Confederation are not working. We need another document. It took 2 more years, until 1787, to finish the Constitution. For the first time in the incorporating papers of any nation on the planet, a guarantee of the freedom of religion was written into the Constitution. 1787, it is signed at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. How many years between 1787 and 1805? Not very many. Who was born in 1805? Joseph Smith. Now, maybe the church can survive again on the planet. The prophet is born in upstate New York. A significant war is fought in 1812. That's a significant war. Why? This time, we beat the British with some definite win. We had our own navy now. The USS Constitution had been commissioned in 1797. We had a major win. They came up from the Potomac River, leveled the White House. We didn't like that very much, and we won soundly this time. We threw them off and we said, no one will ever fight a war against us again on our own land. That was the last war fought with an external force on American soil. We had a little family trouble in 1860, but that was internal. Last war with an external force. Next date is 1820. What happened in 1820? Joseph Smith, the boy prophet, goes into a grove of trees, wanting to know. Something's wrong. There are a lot of people teaching different things. What church should I join? And God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared to him, and the restoration begins. 1830. The church is formally established on the earth. You might be interested to know that in 1830 in Washington, D.C., the patent office, the U.S. Patent Office, was closed. You can read in the congressional record for that year, we've decided to close the patent office because everything has been invented that could possibly be invented. 1830. It's been opened since. More progress on this planet since 1830, brothers and sisters, than in all 5,000 years past. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Why was the gospel restored in 1820? I would suggest to you, brothers and sisters, that the reason the Lord restored the church in 1820 is because that is the only time that it could possibly have survived on the planet. And it almost didn't survive. Was there religious freedom in America in 1830? No. Was Joseph Smith welcomed with, "You talk to God and Christ? Boy, that's exciting. Tell us what they had to say." No, they weren't excited about that. Ultimately, they had to leave the confines of the United States and come to a God-forsaken place called Salt Lake City to survive. Now, you may be asking yourself after listening to all of this, I thought that the U.S. Constitution is what made it possible for the restoration to occur, yet we just read from Hiram W. Smith that we had to leave the United States and go to Mexico, Salt Lake City, which was owned by Mexico at the time, in order for the church to survive. And that is true. We faced so much persecution. And while it took time for culture to catch up with inspiration, without the United States Constitution, the church couldn't have been organized at all. We were able to teach and assemble and print and all of this because of the United States Constitution, and specifically because of the Bill of Rights and that First Amendment. Without it, we would not have had a church to organize, because those beliefs, that speech, all of it would have been shut down. So although it wasn't perfect timing, you can see how it was the only time, and how God's hand again had to be a part of it. How did something that was persecuted so harshly survive without the hand of God? In the Doctrine and Covenants, section 109, verses 54 through 58, we read the following. Have mercy, O Lord, upon all the nations of the earth. Have mercy upon the rulers of our land. May those principles which were so honorably and nobly defended, namely the Constitution of our land by our fathers, be established forever. Remember the kings, the princes, the nobles, and the great ones of the earth, and all people, and the churches, all the poor, the needy, and afflicted ones of the earth, that their hearts may be softened, when thy servants shall go out of thy house, O Jehovah, and bear testimony of thy name, that their prejudices may give way before the truth, and thy people may obtain favor in the sight of all, that all the ends of the earth may know that we, thy servants, have heard thy voice, and that thou hast sent us, that from among all these thy servants, the sons of Jacob, may gather out the righteous to build a holy city to thy name, as thou hast commanded them. God inspired the Constitution not only to provide us with freedoms, political freedoms, and not only to provide us with religious freedom, but specifically to provide the world access to the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. Without these freedoms, the gospel could not have been taught. Think of all the ways, all the nations throughout the earth, except 6, I believe is what President Oaks said, have adopted or copied our Constitution in one way or another and have created their own. But without that beacon of freedom, where would that have started? Where would that have inspiration have come from? And because that freedom has now been spread throughout the world, we are now free to preach the gospel throughout the world. And that connection is beautiful. To conclude, I want to read you several quotes found in Ezra Taft Benson's talk, Our Divine Constitution, where he quotes many of the founding fathers and what they say about God and his hand in the creating of this great nation. And I feel that these words are very important because these individuals, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Charles Pinckney, George Washington, they were there. They were there when this was happening. They were there when the discussions were going on and on and on, and when it was just agonizing for them to try and create a constitution that had never been created before, who were seeking inspiration, and they themselves give credit to God. What should that tell us? I hope that we are not so far past feeling as a nation that we are willing to discount what they have said they felt when they were there. The delegates were the recipients of heavenly inspiration. James Madison, often referred to as the father of the Constitution, wrote, "It is impossible for the man of pious reflection not to perceive in it a finger of that almighty hand which has been so frequently and singly extended to our relief in the critical stages of the Revolution. Alexander Hamilton, famous as the originator of the Federalist Papers and author of 51 of the essays, said, "For my own part, I sincerely esteem it a system, which without the finger of God never could have been suggested and agreed upon by such a diversity of interest." Charles Pinckney, a very active participant and author of the Pinckney Plan during the convention, said, "When the great work was done and published, I was struck with amazement. Nothing less than the superintending hand of Providence that so miraculously carried us through the war could have brought it about so complete upon the whole." Within 10 months, the Constitution was ratified by 9 states and was therefore in force for them. Prophecy had been fulfilled. During his first inaugural address in 1789, President George Washington, a man who was raised up by God, said, "No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency." And lastly, these words from President Benson himself: "Only in this foreordained land, under its God-inspired Constitution and the resulting environments of freedom, was it possible to have established the restored church. It is our responsibility to see that this freedom is perpetuated so that the church may more easily flourish in the future." End quote. So, brothers and sisters, as you go to church this Sunday, I hope that you are grateful, as I will be, for our religious freedom, for the liberties that we have as citizens of this great nation, and for the inspiration that God gave to God-fearing men and women to make the revolution possible and the restoration possible. So until next time, I hope you find many reasons to let your heart be glad.